Just to make their way to the comfortable seats adjacent. Welcome back, committee members. Hope you had an enjoyable summer. House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance is mandated by the House of Commons on an annual basis to consider and make reports upon proposals regarding the budgetary policies of the government. This year, the theme of our consultations is entitled Canada's Place in a Competitive World. As Canada's economic future is in part characterized by rapid technological change and the emergence of new trading partners, the committee is looking to receive from Canadians their views respecting the means of ensuring a prosperous economy by adopting the latest technology, having the needed skills, seizing market opportunities, and making sure that tax regimes enable the attraction of workers and foreign investment in order to maximize our potential as a nation. Decisions need to be taken in the short term to ensure productivity in the long term. The committee will be holding meetings here in Ottawa and will be visiting other centres across Canada, from Whitehorse to St. John's, Newfoundland. Over 400 witnesses will be heard from now until the end of October. Groups and individuals cover an incredible spectrum, as is reflected by our witnesses here today. Our committee looks forward to this challenge and the work in front of us, and we appreciate your presence here. We'll begin our presentations with maximum time allocated, 5 minutes to each presenter, so that we can allow time for exchange and questions thereafter. And I will ask a representative from the Royal Canadian Legion to commence, please. I believe it's Mr. Frost.
Members of Parliament, members of the committee, fellow presenters, my name is Jack Frost. I'm Dominion President of the Royal Canadian Legion. Change in Canadian society is unavoidable as we attempt to deal with challenges brought about by free trade. In adapting to an ever more competitive world, Canada must adopt policies to promote commerce beyond our borders. These policies should not negate Canada's defining attributes of fairness towards all segments of its society. Canada's fundamental societal objectives are enshrined in Section 91 of our Constitution Act, which directs our government, and for that matter, Canadian citizens, to strive for peace, order, and good government. As we attempt to maintain our place in a competitive world, we cannot put aside these fundamental principles. Amongst the numerous factors to consider in ensuring a balance between all segments of a society, one element that cannot be ignored is the reality of our aging population. If Canada wants to ensure a place in a competitive world, it must provide some measure of economic dignity to this growing segment of its population. In 1921, the proportion of seniors was 1 in 20. In 2001, it had climbed to 1 in 8. And by 2041, it'll be 1 in 4. Another factor is that older women outnumber older men. In view of these statistics, there are certain realities that we must deal with. For example, seniors should not be seen as a burden under social welfare and health systems, nor should we assume that they care little about the needs of our society. It should be apparent that older adults will contribute even more in the coming years to Canada's place in a competitive world as purchasers of goods and services. It should be evident that if our society is aging, so are consumers. Thus, it is important for our government to adopt specific measures to preserve the buying power of this segment of society. To that effect, policy should be implemented in broad terms to meet the changing needs of seniors. Most importantly, any attempts to curtail publicly funded pensions should be resisted as being detrimental to Canada's place in a competitive world. The elimination of mandatory retirement should not be viewed as a substitute for a good mix of public and private pensions to meet the needs of seniors. Though it may be said that older adults have larger disposable incomes and that the rate of low incomes amongst older adults may have declined, poverty amongst older adults is still a reality, which will likely increase as the segment of society increases. Generally, the source of income for seniors is threefold: the publicly funded old age securities, the earnings-based Canada and Quebec pension plans, and finally government and private pension plans, including registered retirement savings plans. There are questions concerning the viability of the employer-sponsored pension plans and the potential adjustments that may need to be made to the CPP or QPP if more seniors elect to take their benefit at age 60. The bottom line is that for Canada to remain competitive, it must provide adequate income to all segments of its population, including seniors. Two of these sources of income provided to seniors by the government, the OAS and CPP-QPP, constitute the largest federal income security expenditures, approximately $26 billion in 2003-2004, which are projected to rise substantially. The goal of social cohesion can be achieved not only through publicly funded revenue-sharing programs, such as these pension programs, but also through tax measures such as pension or income splitting for seniors. In reality, the government actively promotes income splitting as a tax-saving strategy while denying the right to seniors to split private pension, superannuations, or RIF benefits. More specifically, the Canada tax system imposes an income tax penalty on private pension and RIF income for seniors who favored a traditional lifestyle of a single breadwinner who worked outside the home and a spouse who worked as a homemaker. Unfortunately, these retired couples pay significantly more tax than two-income couples. This lack of basic fairness in ensuring economic parity and dignity for seniors must be addressed to promote not only social cohesion but also fiscal sound programs for all Canadians in a competitive world. In addition to promoting social cohesion for seniors, the Government of Canada should recognize the exceptional contribution of a special category of Canadians who day in and day out have promoted peace and order at the risk of their own lives. I refer specifically to retired Canadian Forces personnel who deserve improved superannuation benefits for their surviving spouses who currently receive only 50% of the members' superannuation benefits. This is clearly insufficient to meet the basic living expenses previously borne by a couple prior to the pensioner's death, and is no longer in line with current standards. In the same framework, the abatement of the superannuation benefits when CF members reach age 65 are eligible to receive CPP benefits should be rescinded. This abatement of Canadian Forces superannuation benefits occurs at a time when these benefits are most needed because of declining health and other financial realities. Promoting Canada's place in a competitive world can only be achieved by maintaining the buying powers of all segments of our society, especially seniors, who will undoubtedly make up a larger percentage of the overall population in the coming years. It is the belief of the Royal Canadian Legion that the above measures would indeed benefit a sector of our society which has already contributed to peace, order, and good government. These deserving Canadians should be given an opportunity to continue to contribute with economic dignity while helping Canada to promote social cohesion and to maintain viable national infrastructures in a competitive world. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Frost. Le prochain témoin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frost. We'll now move on to our next witness, Ms. Pearson, from the Philanthropic Foundation of Canada.
Merci de votre invitation de pouvoir.
Thank you for this opportunity to present before you. As the president of the Philanthropic Foundations Canada.
Our members collectively manage almost $5 billion in charitable assets and give almost $200 million a year to many of Canada's 80,000 registered charities. Private foundations are major investors in the lives and activities of Canada's communities and charitable organizations. Your paper on Canada's place in a competitive world refers to the fundamental importance of being prepared and being proactive to meet the challenges facing a small open economy. We couldn't agree more about proactivity and preparedness. This is what private foundations are all about, and I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about what they do. But first, you may have seen the news reports this summer about the unbelievable generosity of Warren Buffett, who pledged to give most of his fortune in publicly traded shares to the work of a private foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As a smart investor, Warren Buffett decided that he could make the most impact on the lives of others by giving to a private foundation run by individuals he respects. Would Warren Buffett make a similar gift if he lived in Canada? Almost certainly not. Why? Because federal public policy today acts to discourage donors from giving to a private foundation. How? Through continuing taxation of gifts of publicly traded shares to private foundations. We are here today to argue that the government should proceed urgently to eliminate capital gains taxation of gifts of public shares to private foundations, as it has for public foundations. This will complete the incentive extended in the 2006 budget to donors to public foundations, which has resulted in the unlocking of substantial gifts of assets. But charities could benefit even more if the government didn't discriminate against donors to private foundations. We believe that public policy should encourage giving and not discourage the individual's choice of giving vehicle. Why do private foundations matter in this country? And how do they help Canadian citizens and communities to meet the challenge of competitiveness? Because they are risk-taking, long-term social investors. Their actions are complementary and essential to the actions of public policymakers. Let me tell you a few quick stories to illustrate. We know that timely access to health care is of major importance to keeping people healthy and productive. In Alberta, a private foundation, the Max Bell Foundation, is funding an evaluation of pioneering work to reduce wait times for hip and knee replacements. Without the foundation's intervention, the public health system would take much longer to identify workable approaches to this problem and to create a successful model that can be copied everywhere. We know that charities have to work hard to hire and retain great people. Most charities don't have the money or the time to invest in their own human capital. The Muttart Foundation of Edmonton has funded a breakthrough innovation by funding the work of an HR consultant, a human resources consultant, with clusters of charities in Edmonton and Calgary. Sharing the services of this consultant has allowed them to manage their people issues more competitively, and even better, to reach more clients and deliver more services in local communities. Au Québec, la Fondation Lucie André Chagnon a lancé...
In Quebec, the Lucie and André Chagnon Foundation has launched an unprecedented initiative in Quebec, which is designed to focus on children aged 4 to 12 years of age and to promote the use of sports and fitness. Thanks to this exceptional partnership between the Foundation, the Department of Health and Social Services, and the Department of Education, Leisure and Sport, it has been possible to start to have some influence over the practices and policies of several people involved who are responsible for the well-being of children and their families.
Is creating the conditions for successful integration of Inuit and Southern concepts of justice by funding the teaching work of an Inuit elder in Nunavut's very first law school. The Foundation's investment is supporting the development of a much-needed new generation of young Inuit lawyers. These are just some stories of why private foundations matter in this country. The federal government said in May that it would look seriously at extending the tax incentive it has delivered to donors to public foundations. Why has it waited so long? Government officials say that they want to address concerns about those limited situations in which donors of shares in public companies controlled by the donor could create a conflict of interest situation for a private foundation controlled by the same donor. We recognize the government's wish to be prudent. We have taken this concern seriously, and we have a proposal to reduce it by putting a limit on the number of shares that could be gifted in this particular situation in a given year. We believe this is a very workable solution that will be easy to administer and to comply with. The continuing unfair treatment of donors of public shares to private foundations must be addressed quickly. There's no reason not to move on it now, given the government's stated commitment to look at it seriously and in advance of the next budget. In conclusion, we ask the committee to recommend the final elimination of capital gains taxation of gifts of publicly traded shares to private charities. The country will see immediate benefits in terms of greater charitable contributions and more productive and effective community organizations. This is an important part of our competitiveness as a country. Healthy and well-functioning communities are the building block of a more competitive economy. The actions of proactive private foundations lead directly to more prepared citizens and communities. This is a straightforward, relatively inexpensive way to bring about very beneficial changes to communities right across Canada. Merci de votre attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Pearson. Committee members, just for your assistance in scheduling and so on, lunch will be available here at 11:30, and that will be the case subsequently on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays when we are meeting through lunch hour. So just to assist you in that knowledge. Our next presenters are from the Assembly or the National Assembly of First Nations, and I'll invite Mr. Jacques and Mr. Watts to share their time if they so desire. Thank you for being here, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Honourable members, good morning. Bonjour. I'd like to extend greetings to you from our National Chief, Phil Fontaine. He regrets he's not able to be here presenting today, and would welcome the opportunity to spend perhaps more time going into detail with respect to this unique relationship between the Government of Canada and First Nations and what the funding relationship should look like. We have tabled with the committee a comprehensive pre-budget submission that goes into great details and covers areas like the truth with respect to First Nations funding. This morning, Mr. Jock and I intend to focus in on one particular aspect, which is child welfare, what the effect of funding of First Nations is with respect to our children. We have other examples that we can present to the committee, and perhaps when there's more time, health would be actually a really good thing for this committee to get into. Overall, it is estimated that there are at least 23,000 Aboriginal children in the child welfare system. This is almost 3 times the highest enrollment figures of residential schools during the height of their operations. The high during that time was about 9,000. Indian and Northern Affairs data confirms that between the years 1995 and 2001, the number of status Indian or First Nations children entering into care rose over an astonishing 71.5% nationally. In Ontario, this number rose over 100%. The federal government agrees that the level of funding it provides to First Nations child welfare agencies does not allow them to meet their own statutory obligations with respect to child welfare. On-reserve First Nation agencies receive far less money than their non-Aboriginal peers. Indian Affairs provides some 33% less funding per child to First Nation child welfare agencies than the average province does. This is an annual shortfall of some $109 million. The current formula drastically underfunds services that support families and allows them to safely care for their children in their homes and communities. There's not much money even within that that's targeted at prevention. This chronic underfunding means that for most First Nation children, removal is often the only option that's considered. Not a last option, the only option. The status quo clearly isn't acceptable. The social costs for this crisis is beyond calculation. It leads to dependence and dysfunction, a lot of the social issues that other programs are trying to deal with. Richard?
Thank you. And as Bob has stated, essentially we feel that child welfare represents a case study, and that in a sense this is not the only program area which then effectively represents a two-tier system of care and two-tier system of funding. Since 1997-98, the federal government has retained an overall 2% cap on Indian Affairs funding, which relates to all core services. The cumulative amount of this, of these unrealized INAC funds is estimated as over $10 billion. And this cap of funding is really a key factor in the lack of progress that's been made over the last 10 years in terms of the gap, in terms of closing the gap between First Nations and those other statistical measures that represent all Canadian people. In fact, our research has shown that recent federal payments under the Canada Health and Social Transfers have risen at a rate of 6.6%. And if you take into consideration the equalization program that have not provinces receive, that it represents a 9.9% increase in 2004 and 8.4% in 2005-06. So seeing First Nations budget capped at 2% means that, in a sense, we've lost over $10 billion over that period in terms of purchasing power. Now, those large figures tend to not look real or not show what the impact is at the community level. But just as illustration, at a community level, this represents a loss of about 45.5% of existing funds for an average of 1.5 to 13.9 million at the community level. So really this is also something that affects not only Indian Affairs. Health Canada has a 3% cap, and in fact there are 33 other government departments who deliver Aboriginal programming, and this effect is spread over those departments as well. In terms of solution, it's very clear that to achieve real and sustainable improvement in terms of not only the child welfare system, and this could be a quick win for the federal government, and other related First Nation socioeconomic gaps, that really it's important that there be opportunities created for First Nation citizens to participate in this prospective and competitive economy. To achieve sustainability will be a key element in terms of those program funds, and to implement structural changes that we will be happy to discuss as part of the questions. Yeah.
For both your presentations. Our next presenter will be from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Mr. Alvarez, please. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've never been with a panel that stayed on time so ruthlessly, so I've I've cut mine back. I hope the results are coherent, so congratulations to my colleagues. I'd like to begin very quickly just by giving you an overview of the size and scope of the industry that I represent here today. Canada is currently the #3 largest natural gas producer in the world and the 8th largest crude oil producer. In 2006, direct payments to government in the forms of royalties, tax, and land payments will exceed $27 billion, $7 billion of which flows directly to the federal government. Capital investment this year will exceed $45 billion, with another $30 billion in operating costs. And environmental spending on the capital side by the industry will exceed $1.2 billion, which makes us the largest single spender in the economy. And finally, the total employment impact this year, direct, indirect, and induced, will exceed 500,000 Canadians, making us amongst the largest employers and contractors of First Nations and rural people and businesses. But let me put these numbers into some perspective. By 2015, Canada will be the #4 oil producer in the world and is the only OECD country with a growing energy sector. The industry now represents 30% of the value of the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is an awful lot of stocks, units, trusts, dividends, and other interest-bearing securities. We represent 25% of the total private sector investment in Canada and are active in 12 of the 13 jurisdictions. British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, all significant producers, are have provinces paying into equalization, and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia have made dramatic improvements in their fiscal position over the last number of years. In other words, Canada continues to benefit hugely from its natural resource base, and the time is right to focus how to continue this winning streak. CAP strongly supports the Finance Committee's focus on ways to ensure Canada's place in a competitive world. The major concerns for our sector are the availability of skilled labour, international tax competitiveness, public infrastructure development in areas of growth, and promoting energy research and development. As we have already submitted a detailed brief, Mr. Chairman, I won't go through it. I will simply jump to the recommendations that we make to the federal government. The first is that with the provinces, the federal government needs to promote more trade, technical, and professional training, and insist in identifying, coordinating, and implementing multi-stakeholder strategies to address existing and forecast human resource shortages. Priorities for us here at home include non-traditional workers in areas outside of where we have traditionally been, in addition to women, First Nations, and disabled people, and foreign workers in key areas which have been identified. To that end, we want to thank the government for the opening of the Immigration Office in Calgary. We hope that it will be a big assistance on our foreign worker program. Secondly, we urge the government to continue to complete the business tax reduction measures introduced in the spring 2006 budget. Thirdly, we encourage the government to adjust business taxes as necessary to maintain and improve Canada's international tax competitiveness. Once again, we are strong supporters of the elimination of the large corporation tax and look forward to the upcoming changes to the dividend tax credit in the upcoming, or I guess the current session of Parliament. Fourthly, we urge the federal government to continue to work with the provinces to assure that public infrastructure is not a constraint to continued economic growth. Point to the recent example where the federal government contributed in excess of $150 million to an expansion of Highway 63, which leads from Edmonton to Fort McMurray, as an excellent example of federal-provincial cooperation on key infrastructure. And then lastly, we'd ask that the federal government ensure research and development is highlighted in the forthcoming federal science and technology strategy. We are not running out of resources in this country, but there is no question the resources that we are seeking are further, deeper, and more costly to develop, and it's ideas that will hold the key, not the availability of resources. Taken together, these measures will improve Canada's overall competitive position, and I would be delighted to answer any questions you or the committee may have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvarez, and I'll note that you didn't use your full 5 minutes, and we thank you for that, because it will allow more time for questions after these presentations are completed. From the Railway Association of Canada, Vice President Bruce Burrows. Bruce, please proceed.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Bruce Burrows, VP of the REC, and joining me today is John Lynch, Chair of our Taxation Committee and also AVP of Taxation for Canadian Pacific in Calgary. Thank you for inviting us to share some thoughts today about how rail, under a modernized fiscal and funding structure, could better help Canadians achieve a more prosperous future with improved quality of life and environmental and economic sustainability. In other words, to maximize the potential in the long term, to quote the Chair from his introductory remarks. Rail faces many growth challenges for the first time in decades, with significant changes in the works in terms of services, technologies deployed, security provisions, and an evolving workforce. This year alone, the rail sector has to spend over $2 billion in Canada. Today, we are fundamentally talking about getting Canada's products to market faster and cheaper, and moving passengers and tourists quickly and more efficiently. First, a little bit about who we are. We are the Railway Association of Canada, representing some 60 railway companies across the country. These are the well-known large Class 1 freight railways such as CN and CPR, but also over 40 entrepreneurial short lines from across the country. All of the main commuter authorities in the main urban centres, our intercity service provider VIA, and up to 10 tourist passenger railway companies. We employ with our suppliers over 100,000 people. We're a key partner with the Canadian ports, and we represent, interestingly, a small footprint environmentally with a big capacity on separate and very secure corridors. A third of the land use of highways, and equivalency of over 1,000 cars and up to 280 trucks just per train. This means we are producing only about 3% of transport GHG emissions, with less energy intensity for other air quality emissions. For example, 1 ton of freight can move 165 kilometers with just 1 liter of fuel. With the right technology, rail has become an effective way to minimize the shock of rising fuel prices. Before I turn to my colleague beside me, I'd like to acknowledge the continued progress made with Budget 206, in particular the reduction of the corporate income tax, the elimination of the large corporation tax, and the phasing out of the federal surtax are all welcome and sensible fiscal measures. John.
Okay, I'll try and be brief. Thank you. Just like as Bruce was talking about the capital-intensive nature of rail, the issue of CCAs are particularly important. I would like to refer the committee to the 2004 committee report, in particular recommendation 14, which emphasized that 3 criteria should be used to evaluate CCA classes. Essentially, that similar asset classes should be treated in the same fashion, that Canadian rates be competitive with the U.S., and that Canadian rates should reflect the useful life of assets. The rail sector feels that using these criteria, which we agree with, that there's a compelling case that rail rolling stock should be at a 30% CCA rate. Certainly, if you use the first criteria, trucks are at 40%, road trailers 30%, vessels 33%, and aircraft 25%. Using the second criteria, comparability with the United States, they have a slightly different tax depreciation system, but essentially it would be equivalent for the U.S. rail to about a 30% CCA rate, which we're proposing for the Canadian side. And also on the third criteria, in terms of useful life of assets, with the rapid technological innovation that's taken place, the computerization of the railway sector, a modern locomotive is very much a highly technological asset. So under all 3 criteria, we feel that there's a compelling case for the CCAs to be at 30%. In terms of benefits, we feel that benefits of such a move, because of the capital-intensive nature of the rail sector, there would be economic spin-off for supply and component companies. As Bruce referred to, improved emission performance for the rail sector with the increased investment. And it also helps the Canadian trade competitiveness with, again, the requirement to for Canada's infrastructure to move the enormous amounts of freight that, that the rail sector does move.
And finally, just in addition to that request, which, by the way, this committee has endorsed many times before, we also have on the table two other proposals. One, to continue working with the provinces and the rail industry on a partnership basis to fund short-line infrastructure. And these are the many small railway companies across the country who face many financial hurdles. And then finally, we are also proposing that, thirdly, we create a rail technology development fund. The U.S. government is abolishing by the end of this year its federal excise tax. We suggest, at least in the short term, that in Canada that fund or that amount of money be rolled into a new development fund that can focus on a national innovation effort in the creation and acquisition and use of new rail fuel saving and emissions mitigation technologies. So in conclusion, going forward, rail must be able to make investments that yield significant public benefits in terms of congestion mitigation, emissions relief, energy conservation. We're at an environmental crossroads, so the actions we are calling for today, including the establishment of this new fund, would nicely complement clean air and greenhouse gas emission thinking that currently is very active in Ottawa and help further reduce rail's environmental footprint while attracting more people and freight back on track for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. From the Sports Matters Group, Mr. Ian Bird. Mr. Bird, welcome.
Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you, Chairman Pallister. You'll appreciate, given the theme of the brief being competition, that we in sport are pleased with the frame. It's a natural environment for us. Having said that, you'll also appreciate it's a difficult position for me to be speaking last, in the sense that we prefer the first, second, or third position. We're heading into an Olympic era. We're already into an Olympic era with 2010 on the horizon. Thank you, Mr. McKay. We're at a time when, quite frankly, members of the committee, the generation of children between the ages of 8 and 14 will not live as long as we will. This is the first such generation of young people to be in that situation in modern time, and it is to public policy makers like yourselves and those who care about the future of a younger generation to respond to that scenario. And we make the argument, as indeed the Conservative Party has in the most recent election, and indeed the Liberals prior to them, that this can be addressed through some new fiscal measures. And our specific request to the committee today and in the report, Mr. Chairman, would be for you to encourage the government to fulfill its commitment to invest the equivalent of 1% of federal health spending in the field of physical activity and sport. This is a preventative measure. It responds to a number of things that we know play out in community life and that citizens are endeavoring to pursue on their own terms that I'll speak to. And we make the case, as indeed the governing party has, that the comparator is really quite relevant. Here we're speaking to 1%, the equivalent of 1% of total federal health spending as an upstream investment. This is the equivalent, or this is $435 million, and we would look for that as being fulfilling that commitment in the upcoming budget. It begs the question, of course, well, what can this achieve? And I think the primary concern is the health concern. There are opportunities that we know about to raise awareness of the benefits of sport and physical activity that can be taken up. We know how to do it. In fact, we've done it in the past, and over the course of the last 15 years, we've allowed that to regress. We know that there are issues of infrastructure that are also to be addressed. This is community-based infrastructure that enables citizens who form associations, who create the kind of sport opportunities, who create the local recreation opportunities for young people to go out and pursue activity. And quite frankly, we think it's a modest request. We think the Canadians, the 3 million who volunteer, the some 34,000 citizen-based associations who go about making sport happen in this country. We think that there are certain things that they can do on their own terms. They can volunteer. They can better enable young people to participate in sport, but what they cannot do is build the kind of infrastructure, create the kind of programs that we know can happen through effective public policy and an effective system. So we're turning to the committee to intervene and to encourage the government to indeed fulfill its commitment to invest $435 million in physical activity and sport. I would also point to some of the other elements in the brief, which no doubt you've read. There is despite the burgeoning need for volunteers, there are some trends that I think no doubt you are familiar with in your challenges to raise volunteers to participate in the political process. We share those same challenges, and the Canada Volunteerism Initiative, as well as the sector strategy promoted by Imagine Canada, are two effective and cost-effective ways in which we can address those trends. And as well, I would point to the new sources of funding that we've indicated as being viable alternatives that are worth consideration and indeed lead us to back to the frame of the brief and the frame of competition. There are fiscal measures that have yet to be explored in the field of physical activity and sport. There have been some long-standing contribution agreements that have enabled the investment of programs. We've seen in the 2006 budget, and we're pleased to see the use of the tax system to support parents who place their children into organized physical activity and sport programs. But we've yet to explore some of the other fiscal measures, and we would encourage the committee to look at those, the establishment of a foundation, a national lottery, or a sport bond. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak to the issue, and look forward to your questions.
Well done, Mr. Bird, and thank you all for your presentations. I assure you, Mr. Bird, that committee members who at this point aren't aware of the need for physical exercise will, in 10 weeks from now, be well aware as we sit through this process. So I appreciate your presentation very much. Our
lunch and maybe, a walk around Parliament.
A good suggestion. We'll note that. Our first questioner will be Mr. McCallum. Mr. McCallum, 7 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me begin by congratulating all of the presenters for what I thought were really first-rate and succinct and compelling presentations. But I'd like to begin, since this is the first of many, many meetings that we're going to have to state our party's overall view and thrust. And the basic fact of the matter is that the fiscal cupboard is bare. And so I, as a member of this committee, feel not a little bit embarrassed to be inviting members of the public to come and make proposals for making our economy more competitive when the government has essentially spent all the money in the last budget. The last budget, the annual cost was $15 billion, a record high, and on matters such as GST cuts, which every economist would agree does absolutely nothing to enhance Canada's competitiveness or productivity. And according to the best current estimates by Don Drummond, the amount of money available currently for the rest of the decade is not more than $2 billion per year. And the first proposal alone from the Canadian Legion would alone cost more than $2 billion a year. And this $2 billion is before the government has devoted a penny to the fiscal imbalance. And I think most estimates of the cost of a minimal solution to fiscal imbalance are $3 to $5 billion per year. So it's almost fraudulent, almost insulting to invite Canadians to come and make their requests when the government has already blown its budget in unproductive ways, and now we're inviting you to make great proposals in a situation where there isn't any money. Now, it is true we'll get final budget numbers for last year, perhaps this week, and it might, instead of $2 billion, be $3 to $4 billion. We shall see. But the point remains that having blown the budget in an unproductive way, we're now inviting Canadians in good faith to come and propose productive solutions in a fiscal situation where there's little, if any, room for maneuver.
Order, Mr. Chairman.
So I'd now like to...
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Turner on a point of order.
We have some very important witnesses here before us today whose time is valuable. I'm sure they can listen to CPAC if they want a second-hand political diatribe against the government. But if there are truly some questions from a noted economist with a background as distinguished as yours, cough them up.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was actually...
Mr. Turner does not have a point of order, although he does have a point. And Mr. McCallum may use his time as he desires. I would encourage him to involve the witnesses in some way in the exchange.
I had finished my opening comment, and the reason I did this is it's the first of a series of hearings, and I wanted to put our overall view on the table. And I was about to come to the witnesses, which I will now do. And I'd like to direct my question to the AFN. I've had some involvement with your leader, Phil Fontaine, over the years, having written a paper before I got into politics called The Cost of Doing Nothing, and having followed and supported your activities over these years. And my question has to do with the Kelowna Accord. Here, at least in terms of, was an action that did something. We talk about the cost of doing nothing. The Kelowna Accord did something, $5 billion over 5 years. I guess my question to you is, can you explain to the committee in human terms the cost to your community of not proceeding with the Kelowna Accord, and also more specifically whether, if we had proceeded with the Kelowna Accord, the specific issue you raised today might have been addressed through that accord.
Mr. Jacques, would you like to proceed to answer that, or Mr. Watts?
Okay, just a couple of comments. I think that very clearly in terms of the child welfare situation, I think this is a good example of where, in a sense, we're putting kids at risk in an area where there is a clear federal responsibility. And I think that was our reason for presenting this as a case study, was to show that there are some very real examples of where not providing appropriate funding within what would be considered an appropriate standard or comparable standard, where it has real costs and real implications for children now and essentially in the future because of the inappropriate nature of the interventions that result from that lack of funding. So I think child welfare is a good example. I would say we also have done a lot of work in terms of health, that we actually feel we're on the brink of a health crisis in terms of access to health care and in terms of access to health services, that we feel similarly, and we've worked very closely with the departments to look at the impacts of those, that we're in a situation where there's going to be loss of life and or loss of limb or other similar very real and tangible losses. So we can go down the list in terms of education and so on, which represent similar lost opportunities. And I think our point is, and it's somewhat similar to the point made by the oil sands and with other groups, we really feel that this infrastructure is necessary to be part of participating in this prosperous future that seems to be out there for Canada. To us, dealing with these issues will enable us to participate fully and vigorously in these opportunities, but only if our youth have access to good education, have similarly good access to the training opportunities. So we see it as both a challenge and a very real area of difficulty. So I tried to express some of the human terms, but I think I just want to go back to the individual community example, that in our analysis that these funding restrictions actually represent a 45% reduction in terms of costs that should be there to run those systems appropriately, and that those costs vary from 1.5 million, depending on the size of the community, to 13.9 million in real terms at the community level.
Thank you, Mr. Jacques, for your response. I'm sorry, time's up. Mr. McCallum, la prochaine demandante sera Monsieur Paquette.
We'll now go to Mr. Paquette. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to thank you for your presentations. These are the first ones we've heard, and you've raised some very interesting points that merit further analysis. Now, I'd like to start with the representatives from the Petroleum Association and the railway people, because the large corporations are constantly calling for tax cuts, and we do understand that. But at the same time, there's an argument whereby these taxes can be used for investments. There have been considerable cuts in recent years. Last year, investments weren't there, and this is particularly the case in Quebec. Now, if you had to choose, because if I look at the brief from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, on one side you're asking for us to complete the cuts outlined in the budget of last spring, and then you talk as well as continuing to work with the provinces to ensure that public infrastructure is not a barrier to economic growth, etc. So if you had to make a choice between tax cuts on the one hand or investments in infrastructure on the other, what would you do? Because I assume that behind that you too realize that the infrastructure is deteriorating, the roads are in worse condition. If you had to make a choice, what would your priority be? It's a very broad question, but it deals with the competitive future of Canada. So that's my question. Well, I'd like to begin, Mr. Paquette, and thank you very much for the question, because I think that our sector is a good illustration. Over the past 5 years, there has been a 28% reduction in taxes as compared to 21% in other sectors. At the same time, other investments have gone up by 2 to 7 billion. So there have been considerable investments. There has been an expansion of the industry, and we've seen the return to government Canada-wide. It's been a 3- or 4-fold return on these investments. So there is a good example where both can be done at the same time. Now, perhaps this isn't the case in other industries or other sectors, but I think it's very clearly working in ours. Well, last year, for example, in Quebec, there was less than 1% of investment. And everybody had a reduction in their taxes. Now, I'm not sure whether the railway people would like to comment on my question. Yes.
Focused on investments and infrastructure. As you say, the highway infrastructure is deteriorated, so has the railway infrastructure. Quebec is a prime example of a new partnership agreement that we have with the Quebec government and the federal government to spend up to $100 million on a shared basis in infrastructure in Quebec. We hope to conclude that very soon. And we hope, as I mentioned earlier, to expand that type of partnership investment coming from the Canada Strategic Infrastructure Fund to other parts of the country, again, to support those smaller railway companies. The proposal to convert our excise tax into a new technology fund, again, is an investment-oriented objective. And then the third response in terms of reducing the capital cost allowance, it's a very modest fiscal measure in terms of a reduction, but it has huge investment implications for new technology.
Je dois dire d'ailleurs que j'aime beaucoup votre approche de toute façon sur la question des amortissements.
Well, I'd like to point out that I do like your approach. The committee has commented on this, and the BQ agrees with it. But now, with respect to tax reductions, tax credits, other measures that, like you've mentioned, perhaps they could lead corporations to take the necessary steps to continue in economic growth and to enhance the competitiveness of our industry. Now, Mr. Chairman, if I've got a bit of time left, I do have a question for Mr. Fontaine. I'm very much aware of the presentation that you made, of the issues that you've raised. I have the MN1 in my writing. I go to the area often, and I can clearly see the needs that are there and the challenges facing the community. This year, it's an exceptional year, an exceptionally good year. There will be 20 housing units built. And we can see the impact of the overpopulation. There are a host of problems. There are a number of problems linked to this lack of adequate housing. Now, as part of our report, and this is a question, I wonder how we can prioritize this issue of social housing so that investment, massive, significant investment is made in order to help the Aboriginal communities and other communities to meet their housing needs. So that's a very broad question that I have for you. Is that not something that should be a priority this year? There are a number of other priorities that you've mentioned as well, but could you please say a few words about that?
In our action plan, which was presented to First Ministers, housing was highlighted. We talked both about social housing and market value housing. Our plan calls for a mix of both fair market and social housing. There's some that think that if only we had private land ownership and more private housing, that all the problems in the world would be taken care of. That's just not the case. Social housing requires huge investment. We're looking at the development of an institution outside of government, which would work directly with First Nations to develop both fair market housing and social housing. In terms of priority, I think that's something that we need to do some joint work on. We've highlighted child welfare in this presentation to bring a sharp focus to something that's very real in terms of the youth of this country, in terms of the future of First Nations. We've presented it as a case study, but in our full report we cover all of the areas, and clearly the relationship between a good house to live in and being able to do homework, and the relationship between overcrowding and disease can't be overlooked. The relationship between poor quality housing and respiratory problems and diseases related to mold. I mean, all those things are there. Again, what we wanted to do is present a case study to really focus the committee's attention on how the 2% cap has affected our communities very, very directly.
Merci, Monsieur Watt.
Madame Blonzy, 7 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you for good presentations, not only in boiling them down to the time you had available, a very short time, but giving us additional background material, which you can be sure will be looked at and considered. I particularly, though, want to just take a minute to address the musings of my friend, Cassandra McCallum, who, to listen to him, you would think Canada's on the brink of disaster. Sadly, sometimes politics does intrude in what should be straightforward considerations, but I can tell all of you that, in fact, under our government, spending on a number of programs actually increased from what it was before. And in addition, we believe that by putting money back into the hands of job creators and ordinary citizens, that tax revenues will actually go up. And this has been demonstrated in jurisdiction after jurisdiction. And so we know that the government that Mr. McCallum was part of is spending increased 15% a year and more, and yet you're still here with tremendous concerns. And we want to continue to meet those concerns in meaningful ways, and all of you in various ways have given high marks to our government's first efforts, and now we're going to our next budget, and again considering the needs of all your organizations and your different sectors of the economy. You all contribute in many, many ways. And so I want to just ask some brief questions, starting of course with the gold medalists. First shall be last and the last first. You mentioned in number 3 of your recommendations that new fiscal policy measures, including tax measures, would remove economic barriers to participation in sports, promote activity at the community level. And I wondered if you could be a little bit more specific about the tax measures you have in mind, but very brief, please, because I do have other questions.
Thank you for the question. We won't, I think it's a given that we know about the Children's Fitness Tax Credit that's been tabled, and we're seeking its extension beyond the age of 16 to the age of 18. It's exactly at the age of 16 that we see a decline in participation, especially amongst young women. And so the point at which the tax credit ends, and when the economic barrier is then put back in place over this next 2 years, we're likely to see a continuing trend, a downward trend of especially young girls' participation. There would be real benefit to looking at the tax system as a means to support volunteer training, and this is yet to be explored by any government, including provincial and municipal governments, and yet it could respond to both the trending, a downward trending on volunteerism, as well as the importance of volunteers to physical activity and sport. And we've sought an upward amendment of those corporate donations to sport to go from 100% right off to 150% to promote the involvement of the private sector in sport participation opportunities. You likely all know of the local dry cleaner and a supermarket that seeks to support the local baseball group or the trail walking group, and we think it's a viable approach to support those small businesses who are supporting the small local community nonprofit organization. We'd consider those three opportunities as worth your consideration at the committee level.
Good. Well, we appreciate those level of detail. That's very helpful to the rail people. You're looking for opportunity to make greater investment. I note that greenhouse gas emissions and the use of fuel is a great concern, I think, for all of us here, all parties. And it has been suggested that moving goods more often by rail would address that problem to some degree. And I'm wondering if you have any studies that your industry has done that you might be able to share with the committee, showing how increased use of movement of goods by rail may impact the environmental considerations. You alluded to that, but do you have any studies you could share?
Yes, in fact we do, and I'd be pleased to pass some material forward to you that clearly illustrates that.
If we could get that, Mr. Chairman, that would be very helpful. To Mr. Alvarez, as you well know, sometimes the oil industry is seen as sort of the fat cat of the corporate world, and yet you pointed out that it is a real contributor to the fiscal pie that we can use to support other measures in our society and other groups. But I wonder specifically again on the environment, because this is a big concern of mine and many others, what the industry can offer in terms of cooperating with other measures on reducing the environmental impacts of oil and gas production.
Sure. In 30 seconds or less?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, 30 seconds.
I think there are two parts to this. One is the way you operate your business, and I think we have seen dramatic changes, particularly at the provincial level, on things like flaring and venting, which are the gases that are released. And we're looking forward to the government's upcoming air quality and climate change package, because clearly that's something that's going to push things a little further. It's something we'll participate in. But quite honestly, Ms. Valenci, the biggest issue is capital stock turnover. When you bring in and build a $8 billion facility, which is what a new oil sands project costs, you're not going to turn around and change out the equipment in 2 years. Changing out equipment and the processes that go with that take time, and both in terms of their development and in terms of the deployment. Just throw out one stat: a new oil sands plant will have 99.5% SO2 recovery. You go back to a plant that was built 15 years ago, it's probably less than 80%. On the other hand, you don't just retrofit a facility quickly. So things like capital cost allowance, those kinds of things, are things that we support and we think are important. It's clearly something we spend a lot of time on, and I imagine we'll continue to do.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Mr. Watson, Mr. Jack, I want to get to you. I appreciated the fact that in your presentation you had a page on solutions. It's easy to point out problems, but we don't always get solutions. And I wonder if you would just... Oh, I can't believe it.
We'll continue now with our next questioner, Mademoiselle Schlise. Please proceed. 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thanks to everyone here to kick off what's going to be a very lengthy and exciting, I think, process. as we try to shape the next federal budget and try to shift some of the priorities of the present government. I think, notwithstanding what John McCallum has said, this is about choices, and many of you have confronted that difficult challenge that we face. I think one shouldn't assume the cupboard is bare. When you read the reports on the growth in the economy and surplus dollars available, I think we will soon find that there is significant flexibility in the government coffers, and we really do need to grapple with some outstanding obligations. And I think if we're talking about choices, we are getting down to or in a competitive economy, it's not just about the size of the oil reserves or the profits of banks, but it is about how we treat our seniors and our youth, and how we invest in the future. So I want to start with seniors and our veterans and ask Mr. Frost if he could give us a little more detail on his two proposals. It seems to me that given what is happening in Afghanistan, and given the fact that we do have troops who are dying and coming home with many problems, health problems, how can we advance this issue of improved superannuation benefits for surviving spouses and preventing the abatement of the benefits when CPP kicks in? It seems to me that given the conditions, economic and social conditions facing our troops, this is a pretty basic request. What obstacles have you run into, and what can we do to advance this cause?
I thank you for the question. I'd like to draw, I guess, your attention first to the private and Crown industries, where the survivor pension benefit ranges anywhere from, say, 50 to 75%. Actually, it's more in tune of about 65% benefits that they receive. So I think it's only fair that we look at our CF personnel, the ones that today are putting their lives on the line. Since an example, since 2002, 36 Canadian soldiers have lost their lives, including the 4 that just lost their lives last night or yesterday. 13 have died since August, and 150 have been seriously injured and returned to Canada. Now, they deserve not only great benefits from Veterans Affairs Canada, which they do receive, but they require the same eligibility and the same fair and equitable treatment from the superannuation benefits, which, as we've suggested, would include a 60% survivor benefit, as well as the abatement of the CPP.
Thank you. I think this is a very specific recommendation, Mr. Chair, that we ought to take a look at very seriously. On to children. I mean, Richard and Bob, you've identified a very, very serious problem in terms of building a sustainable and competitive society, and you've given us some clear solutions. There's another area where I think we need to address the problem, and that's with respect to the cap that has been on INAT funding since 1995, which, if it hadn't been there, would have given another, I think, $10 billion to funding that would have helped deal with these problems. So my question is the cap still in place? And is there still a freeze on is the present government's freeze on internal spending still there? Does it affect your areas, and specifically, what about in Health Canada?
Our understanding is that there is an overall 3% cap on all federal funding that's being proposed, and our understanding is that INAC is remaining at the 2% cap at the current time. What we also understand, though, is that part of, as what was alluded to, part of what is also going on is budget reductions in terms of contribution to potential funds. And we understand that both Indian Affairs, and Health Canada are both going through a process of examining those cuts as well. So there may be not only a constriction on the amount of growth, but there will also be reductions which are on the other end of that, which will further compound the potential funding problems that are there. In addition, as I mentioned, there are 33 other federal departments who have some responsibility for First Nations issues, and those agencies are not exempted from the cap. And further, one of our concerns is that, in fact, First Nations or Aboriginal programs may, in fact, be targeted and reduced most in terms of those reductions. So we see that there is not only the go-forward position, but there's actually the whole issue of cuts that may actually make this whole situation even more dramatic, in our opinion.
Thank you.
Just a brief time for a comment.
One last short question to Ian regarding, again, youth. I hear what you're saying, but would it not have made, given the fact that the physical fitness credit for children is going to be about $40 million this year and another $160 million next year, that's what it's going to cost us, wouldn't it have made more sense to take that money and put it into programs and facilities to meet the objectives that you're talking about, so that our young people can be truly engaged in physical fitness without restriction because of economic barrier?
It's true that the current tax credit will only cover a certain part of the population, and as you know, your party supported what amounted to a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investment recommendation through the last election. We're talking about two degrees here. One is a relatively modest investment in a certain part of the population to get their kids into sport programs, and the other is something that really needs to be the kind of Canadian endeavor that was taken up around the centennial year in 1967 through to 1972, where we have a real substantial community infrastructure fund, so that your local community center is not 40 years old and at risk in the winter snow load. So I agree with you that there is a comprehensive approach required. There's both the kind of fiscal tax measures that have been proposed, there's the kind of infrastructure programs that are essential, that quite frankly link up with the child welfare agenda that we heard about from my colleagues here. So it's the comprehensive approach that's essential.
We'll continue with Mr. Savage. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the panelists. I thought the presentations were very good. I want to follow up with Mr. Bird, and the place I want to go puts me in agreement with Ms. Washalisa Lease, which causes me a mild level of concern, but not too much. I do want to talk about fitness. It's an area that particularly for children, that I've spent some of my life working in, and since I've come to Parliament, I joined the Health Committee last year in hopes that we would have some impact on getting a national wellness agenda put through, following on the creation of the Public Health Agency of Canada, which I think is a good initiative both for public health but also population health, chronic disease. I come from Atlantic Canada. We have the highest levels of chronic disease. Diabetes is out of control, cancer, heart disease, and all the risk factors for poor health. I've talked recently with Dean Hartman, who owns New Bodies in Nova Scotia, and Kevin Cameron, who are people involved in trying to put together a health promotion agenda in Nova Scotia. We're fortunate in Nova Scotia that we have Canada's first health promotion department, ably led by Scott Logan and people like Jamie Ferguson, who I don't know, you may have met somewhere along the way. They've done some good work. My concern is that specifically, and I'm pleased with your recommendations, one of them mentions including tax measures. The other are sort of more involved in volunteerism and infrastructure. And it seems to me that we have to go that way, that the kids who are most unable to access measures that will keep them fit are the lowest level income of society. I just registered my son for hockey for the first time. He's 7. It was $350 to register. It was another some hundreds of dollars to buy the equipment. There's travel. Getting a tax credit at the end of the year would incent nobody to do it. It will help me and it'll help other people who already can register their kids in hockey, but it doesn't provide any kind of direct incentive for kids who otherwise might not be able to register for hockey. So we have the Commonwealth Games coming up in Halifax, which I strongly support, mainly because I think it will provide some infrastructure afterwards for kids and adults and others in the community. So I have two questions after that lengthy regional preamble, which is, do you agree that direct investment in infrastructure is more important, and also direct investment in programs mainly for kids who can't afford to go otherwise is more important than tax measures, or do you think that the tax measure is better? And I'm not condemning. I think it's a worthwhile initiative. I think it is not, in my view, it's not the priority. I'd be interested in your view. The second thing is, whatever we do for hockey and baseball, should we not do for dance and other forms of physical fitness?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can become a spokesperson for the issue, Mr. Savage, in the sense that we're talking about a crisis. We were talking about a youth generation that is going to face something that none of us have, and the Canadians have not faced. And so that we need, in a sense, everyone putting their oar in the water is the key thing. We've got a $14 billion, the current estimate, $14 billion infrastructure deficit that we've just let aggregate since 1972, when the last infrastructure programs were shut down. So, we will create, through raising awareness and through some of the current tax measures, new demand, and where will these young kids go? So I think infrastructure has got to be a key part of this. I also think, though, that we don't want to overlook the fact that there's a human infrastructure component to this, and this is the part that Nova Scotia has really led on. They've created a whole leadership agenda around the concept of health promotion. The people that you mentioned have spearheaded this, and as a result, they've been the ones to describe the link between tax measures, infrastructure, and the kind of community investment programs that will actually get us out of this crisis. So, can we collectively take on all those three things at the same time? I think we're pretty mature folks. It happens. Perhaps it's not surprising that you don't bump up against the NDP position and others, in that it's a relatively nonpartisan issue. We're talking about community sport, kids being active, and the kind of basic ingredients to helping that happen. So, my guess is we can pursue this, and this next budget's a good time to do so.
Je suis désolé. Pour continuer, M. Saint-Cyr, 5 minutes.
We'll now go on to Mr. Saint-Cyr. You've got 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, would like to thank you for coming this morning. It must sometimes be frustrating because I'm sure you have many things to say and you just have a few moments to make your remarks. I would like to hear the views of the people from the railway sector. You talked about investments to improve the competitiveness of the industry, etc. But I'd also like to have your opinion on investments that are required for many Quebecers, for example, who live in ridings like mine, where the rail industry is very present and where they have to live with the consequences of the development of the railway sector. Now, to my mind, and in the views of many Quebecers, there should not only be investments to deal with those, and I'll give you 4. First of all, there's a problem of noise. For historic reasons, there is a lot of rail movement through residential neighborhoods. People have to deal with it. And the more there will be investments in this industry, the more prosperity there will be, the more there will be rail movements through these residential neighborhoods. And this will simply worsen the problems people are currently facing there. People are looking at technology solutions to reduce noise levels or new lines in order to bypass these neighborhoods. And I assume that would require very significant and substantial investments. Now, there's also the times when the trains go by. With respect to the transportation of dangerous goods or hazardous materials on these rail lines, that's a second issue. Railway companies often don't have other places to store these facilities, but this too is being stored on the rail lines near residential neighborhoods. So that's another problem. Thirdly, there's the issue of infrastructure. The land owned by the members of your association, many times they're in a very deteriorated state. There are some overpasses in my riding where I'm afraid the cement's simply going to fall off. The state of the facilities is very pitiful. They don't seem to have additional funding to invest in this very basic maintenance. And then there's the issue of contamination. So my question is this: if the government were to come up with some kind of fiscal incentive, some kind of formula to encourage you to do your share, to alleviate these concerns I've raised, do you think that the members of your association would be prepared to invest to resolve those issues?
Colleague is a good answer for your question about infrastructure. We are very supportive of the federal and Quebec governments concluding an arrangement to spend up to $100 million on infrastructure in Quebec, where I think we can make some real improvements to improve the quality of the track and some various facilities that can help take some trucks off the road and help alleviate some environmental congestion pressures. I think on the issue of the noise as well and handling dangerous goods, one of the proposals I spoke about today was the establishment of a new rail technology development fund. By putting the excise fuel tax into that fund, we can look at new technologies that can help with noise abatement and minimization. And there's some ideas out there that we would be very interested in investing in. If we had a better CC8 regime, we would also be better able to invest in those things. So our members are very keen to make some of those investments. Handling dangerous goods, there's a lot of work going on in that area. We're looking at ways to move those cars more quickly so that they don't sit on a siding close to residences for a very long time. They keep moving, and that minimizes the risk and helps keep residents more comfortable. We have a major agreement with the Fédération of Canadian Municipalities to address noise issues. We're working very closely with Westmount and a number of other municipalities in Quebec who are very keen and supportive of that initiative, by the way, and are help leading that initiative, which I think will help on the proximity front as well.
Mr. Saint-Cyr, to conclude, Mr. Turner, you're around 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to direct a question to Mr. Frost and somewhat in response to Mr. McCallum's throwaway line about your request, which I gather was for pension splitting, as costing $2 billion or some such ridiculous amount that the government doesn't have. So I'd just like to explore this issue for a minute. You brought it up in your presentation about pension splitting among your members and among seniors in general. Do you have a realistic estimate of the cost of that particular change in the tax code?
Can I just take a second?
If I could answer that.
Please.
We don't have an estimate of the cost, but the reality is that in the year 2040, 1 of 4 of your people who are going to be buying goods are going to be seniors. So surely you have to preserve a way to allow them to compete in Canadian society and purchase these goods. And this is probably one way that would cost a very small amount of money to the government and would allow Canada to remain competitive.
All right, thank you. Well, I have good news for you. I do have a cost. And actually, this is an interesting issue. I think it's an issue of tax fairness where we have a lot of Canadian seniors who are in a higher tax bracket because the income in the family flows into that family in the hands of one individual and not two. I actually asked the Library of Parliament if they would research this issue and come up with a cost estimate. I'd like to share that with you. The total cost to the Treasury of allowing income splitting for couples with at least one spouse aged over 65, and that would allow all taxable income flowing into that household to be shared between the two individuals in that household. The total cost is $301.9 million. $301.9 million. And the significant portion of the benefits would flow to seniors in the income bracket of $40,000 to $60,000. So perhaps we might be able to develop that, and you might be able to make the case as to whether that is an affordable issue or not. I think it is. Also, Mr. Frost, I'd like you to respond to a comment. I did write about this the other day on my infamous blog, and I made the case for pension splitting. I'd like to read you a response that was typical that I got from a number of people. I refuse to pay higher taxes so that the greedy 50 to 65-year-olds can get optimal health care and drive their Mercedes. They had every opportunity to prepare for retirement and fund it on their own. No more affluent time in history. If they've it all tied up in their houses and cars, tough luck. How do you respond, sir?
That's rather difficult to respond to that. It's kind of it's an unfair statement. I think that you look at a dual income family today and you do see more affluency out there, but the people that are in need today stem mostly from single wage earners, and the spouse traditionally stayed home, took care of the family, which was encouraged by the government of the day and private industry. In the 1960s and 70s, at that time is when we started seeing more of the traditional, the spouse come into the labor market, and it's only been since I believe probably 1986, in that range time, that the female of the household, her wage has drew proportionally in line to what it should have been with the male. So we're looking today at a more affluent, younger society, but the traditional, the senior society, I disagree with it. You're not seeing that today.
Mr. Frost, are you aware of a conference we're having here in Ottawa on October the 3rd to speak about pension splitting? Are you able to? Your colleague, I believe, indicates that you are. I'm wondering if you're able to be in attendance.
We're certainly supportive of the conference. We're trying to see if it will fit with our schedule.
All right. Well, I might just remind members who are interested in educating themselves more on this issue, and I might address this particularly to Mr. McCallum, that we are having a conference here on October the 3rd, Tuesday, at 10 o'clock, and you're most welcome to come by, and we're going to be discussing this issue, the costs, and whether, in fact, it is an affordable change to the tax code, and whether it's something, in fact, that should be brought forward by the government as an issue of tax fairness. Thank you.
Thank you, members, for your participation and intervention, and thank you very much for your presentations, all panelists. We appreciate your time. We will take just a brief recess to give committee members and staff the opportunity to eat, and we will ask the next panel to make their way to their seats, please. Thank you. I'll invite witnesses to get comfortable and encourage our committee members to return to their seats. We'll continue, the Standing Committee on Finance will continue its deliberations in the pre-budget consultation process. We welcome and thank our witnesses for being here. And I'll apologize on behalf of committee members as we continue to partake of our lunch while the process continues, but understand we can multitask. So we will be listening. We will begin this round with a representative from the Canadian Trucking Alliance, Mr. Bradley. If you'd like to proceed, no more than 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Delighted to have the opportunity to address you again. For those of you that aren't too familiar with our industry, we move 90% of all consumer products and foodstuffs in Canada, excuse me, and about 2/3 of Canada's trade by value with the United States. The essence of our presentation for you today is to increase the sustainability of our industry from an environmental point of view and also our competitiveness. Some of you may know that in recent months, CTA has issued a 14-point Made in Canada Clean Air Act plan. I'm pleased to announce that only 2 of those 14 measures require some sort of a tax or expenditure measure by the federal government of Canada. However, in total, our plan would lead to a reduction in air equivalency terms of a reduction of 91,000 current trucks from the roads in terms of NOx, and in terms of the other major contributor to smog, a reduction in 100,000 current trucks with regards to particulate matter. With respect to greenhouse gas emissions, our 14 proposals would combine to contribute to a reduction, again in air equivalency value, air quality value, of 46,000 existing trucks, so quite substantial. We are on the cusp of a radically different new technological situation in the trucking industry as it pertains to smog. By law, starting on October 15th of this year, all diesel fuel for trucks only sold in Canada will see a lower sulfur content from 500 parts per million to 15 parts per million. That fuel will be used in the new smog-free trucks, the 2007 model year, again by law, which will come onto the marketplace this October as well, which will see between now and 2010 the virtual elimination of smog emissions from trucks. This is by law both from Environment Canada and from the U.S. EPA. Ours is the only industry whose fuels, only freight industry, whose fuels and engine emissions are so regulated. However, these new engines come with a significant new cost. Just to purchase them, the ticket price is averaging around $8,500 Canadian more to purchase. There are increased maintenance costs, and there's the uncertainty of some of the new technologies, all of which contributes to pressures on carriers to pre-buy before the new engines come into the marketplace. What we would like to see, for again, if the goal here is the environment, to accelerate the penetration of those vehicles into the marketplace as soon as possible. We're calling for an aggressive, more aggressive, separate capital cost allowance bracket for this equipment, not for all trucks that are out in the marketplace, but simply for the new equipment so that we can get them out into the marketplace more quickly. In terms of fuel efficiency, another major contributor to idling that really goes along with the environment that we have here in Canada is the idling of truck engines. Over the last few years, we have benefited greatly from a program from Natural Resources Canada, which provided rebates of up to 19% for investment in auxiliary power units to run heating and cooling systems so the truckers don't have to keep their engines running all night or all day, depending on whether it's a heat wave or in the middle of winter. This program has worked exceedingly well, has encouraged the investment in over 13,000 Of these units, the government's investment was $6.2 million, industry's investment to date $31.3 million. Unfortunately, that program was canceled in March of 2006. We would like to see it reinstated. Now, on both these counts, if you don't like CCA rates or rebates, there are other ways that one could approach this if through ITCs, etc. But certainly with respect to the capital cost allowance, we're already at a competitive disadvantage compared to U.S. carriers. There's a natural linkage there a gap that we would like to see closed. We also obviously have an interest in infrastructure. And we were very pleased when the current government announced a highway and border infrastructure fund where monies are dedicated to that. However, we're still only investing about 10% rather of the fuel taxes that are generated in Canada. We'd like to see either more of that invested in the highways and borders, or we should get rid of the excise tax on diesel fuel. Excise tax is an archaic form of taxation. It should be weaved in with the goods and services tax. Finally, an old chestnut of ours, in 1994, the federal government followed the United States by reducing the meal tax deductibility for all employees, including truck drivers, from 80% to 50%. In the United States, they saw the error of their ways and have, over the course of the last several years, moved back towards the 80% level, which they would reach in 2007. We would like to see that restored for workers who spend a significant amount of time away from home, whose hours of service are dictated by regulation, and they don't always have the luxury of determining where to stop and what to eat. This is really just a subsistence issue. That is my presentation. Thank you very much.
We'll continue with Mr. Williams from the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, I want to thank the committee for giving tourism a voice in the pre-budget consultations. We hope your report will acknowledge the important role this industry can play in ensuring Canada's prosperity. Tourism is a $62.7 billion sector that accounts for 2% of Canada's GDP. More than 200,000, mostly small and medium-sized enterprises, operate in communities large and small in every province and territory in Canada. They keep 1.6 million Canadians working, contribute to community and economic development, and generate over $15 billion in tax revenues, including a federal share of $7.7 billion. Thus, tourism makes an important contribution to Canada's local and national economies, its standard of living as a nation, and the quality of life of all Canadians. It also makes a less tangible but equally important contribution to fostering mutual recognition and understanding among citizens of different countries, in fact, helping Canadians when they travel Canada to understand Canadians better. This is a tremendous asset in an era of rising global tensions. But that contribution is being challenged on a number of fronts by growing competition from other countries that recognize the value of tourism and are investing strongly in marketing their countries, by the stronger Canadian dollar that has made Canada a relatively more expensive destination for American visitors, by rising fuel prices that have increased transportation costs and heightened security that is reducing traveler confidence and convenience, and by a domestic public policy environment that is threatening the Canadian tourism industry's growth potential. According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, Canada's global ranking has fallen from 8th in 2000 to 12th in terms of receipts, and from 7th in the world to 11th in terms of international tourism arrivals. U.S. visitation to Canada fell by close to 30% from 2000 to 2005, from 44 million visits to 31.7 million visits. At the same time, Canada's travel deficit more than doubled, from $2.4 billion to $5.5 billion. So what can be done? Three things. There are some key actions that we can take as a federal government to ensure that Canada continues to be a source of prosperity for Canadians. First and foremost, it should increase its investment in destination marketing. Canada has some of the best tourism products, services, and experiences in the world, but it is not getting the message out to enough potential travelers about what we have here. The Canadian Tourism Commission needs an extra $100 million so Canada can compete and win. That amount would be leveraged with matching private sector investments, and it would pay off, according to an independent study, in up to $4.2 billion in increased tourism revenue growth, yielding about 45,000 new jobs and $620 million a year in federal tax revenues. $100 million investment, $600 million return to the federal government. In the area of human resources, the federal government should invest more in tourism-related education programs through the Canadian Tourism Human Resource Council, and it should consult with the tourism industry on improvements to foreign worker programs. These actions are needed to help the industry deal with the shortfall of workers in the next decade. Finally, in the critical area of air travel, Ottawa should immediately reduce airport rents and completely eliminate the air traveler security charge. Canada's air transportation system and the many businesses that rely on it have been bearing the burden of government-mandated cost add-ons that threaten the competitiveness of our airline industry in Canada. Our written brief discusses each of these areas in more detail. I urge the members to take a look at those in preparation of their final report. And again, I thank you for your time.
We have Ian Morrison here with Friends of Canadian Broadcasting. I invite you to make a presentation, Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Friends is a watchdog group financed by 100,000 Canadians. Our mission is to defend and to enhance the quality and the quantity of Canadian programming in the English language audiovisual system. Merci de nous recevoir aujourd'hui.
Thank you for inviting us today. We always appreciate the privilege of appearing before you and the opportunity to present our point of view with a view to influencing your deliberations.
Small country dependent upon international trade for wealth creation, Canadians have a large stake in promoting abroad our identity and our brand. In large measure, Canada's branding is the product of our audiovisual system, the export of our images and stories to other countries. Confidence in our cultures, a belief in the integrity of our identity, and a projection of those values beyond our borders are key to our national development. Successful models of national branding among our principal competitors abound. Other than the United States, where Hollywood plays this role, the best international branding models come from countries with strong national public broadcasters, such as Finland, Denmark, Norway, the United Kingdom, and Germany. The House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage researched investment in public broadcasting by OECD countries in its recent report, Our Cultural Sovereignty, and identified that Canada ranks 20th among 25 countries. These data are reproduced in our written submission, and they come from page 178 of the Lincoln Report. Canada spends 0.08% of our GDP on public broadcasting, well below the OECD average of 0.14, and far below the range of 0.28 to 0.19 in the leading countries I just mentioned. Friends recommends that the committee recognize the importance of strong public broadcasting to Canada's identity and branding in the world. As a long-term goal, funding for Canadian public broadcasting should be increased to at least the OECD average, and in return, Parliament should establish practical benchmarks for Canadian public broadcasting. Second, we recommend that your committee re-adopt a recommendation from your December 2004 report that, and I'm quoting, the federal government provides stable, long-term funding to a number of important cultural institutions. Specifically, your committee recommended then that the government should increase funding to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and Radio-Canada. The recent CBC lockout demonstrated what a Toronto Broadcasting Corporation would sound and look like. As you know, it has also demonstrated how strongly Canadians rely upon our national public broadcasters, and in this respect, you might be interested in data from an Ipsos-Reid opinion poll, which Friends commissioned during the week before the writs of the 2004 general election. In that poll, Ipsos-Reid posed the following question. Assume for a moment that your federal member of parliament asked for your advice on an upcoming vote in the House of Commons on what to do about CBC funding. Which of the following three options would you advise him or her to vote for? Decrease the funding to the CBC from current levels, maintain funding for the CBC at current levels, or increase funding to the CBC from current levels? Ipsos-Reid found that 9% of Canadians would recommend decreasing CBC's funding, 51% would maintain it at current levels, and 38% would increase CBC funding from current levels. We also draw to your attention a series of recent recommendations from the Senate Transport and Communications Committee, which touched on reforms to CBC's mandate. Among its recommendations, the Senate called on the CBC to reduce its dependency on advertising revenues and professional sports. Friends recommends to the Finance Committee that it endorse a two-part reform in CBC financing. In return for reducing or eliminating its reliance on advertising revenues, the CBC's public funding should be increased. This funding could come from either general revenues or from charges to the television distribution system akin to the subscription fees charged for services like TSN or Sportsnet. Friends notes that such a reform would likely enjoy the support of many of Canada's private broadcasters. It could be introduced gradually over several years, and it would fulfill the Prime Minister's commitment to, and I'm quoting, reduce CBC's dependence on advertising revenue and its competition with the private sector for these valuable dollars, especially in non-sports programming, unquote. In conjunction with these reforms to the financing of public broadcasting, Friends endorses a proposal that Heritage Minister Bev Oda made that, quote, the government should undertake to establish an independent task force to review the mandate, role, and services of CBC SRC. That task force should be charged with recommending reforms to the CBC's management and governance, which would remove political patronage from the CBC's board and presidential selection process, in keeping with the best international standards for public broadcasting. J'ai deux phrases à ajouter. Ça, c'est que la société...
I've got two last sentences to add. CBC SRC is our largest cultural institution. It plays a crucial role in our democratic life. We must ensure that it remains sound and able to fulfill the very important mandate entrusted to it by Parliament. Thank you.
Canadian School Boards Association, Mr. Lansbean, President.
Thank you. The Canadian School Boards Association represents school boards across the country. Our member provincial school boards associations provide direct support to boards that, in turn, govern the range and quality of educational services in Canada's public schools. We are at the level of democracy responsible for the development of Canada's most precious resource. Elected trustees represent Canadian communities, Canadian taxpayers, including the 70% of the population who do not have children in school. As a result, they must be committed to two things: high-quality education for every child and a well-educated Canadian citizen. Our submission contains 6 areas worthy of federal action or need for cooperation with other levels of government: the goods and services tax, immigrant and refugee children, First Nations education, national emergency support for such situations as soaring energy prices, federal support for provincial efforts in early childhood learning enhancement, and copyright legislation. I will be brief and focus on number 1, the GST, 2, immigrant and refugee children, 3, First Nations education, federal support for early childhood learning enhancement, and copyright. Now I turn to the GST. Transfer payments indirectly support education throughout our country. And through equalization, the federal government also ensures that the provinces have the fiscal capacity to ensure a quality level of education. It works. Canadian students rank amongst the best in the world. However, school boards are struggling to maintain that quality. They're routinely forced to rob Peter to pay Paul, juggling special needs students against repairs as their budgets become leaner and less discretionary. When the GST was imposed, it came as a burden that exasperated these struggles. We ask you to stop clawing back, stop this clawback that you provide through transfers and eliminate GST on school board purchases. During the last year's pre-budget process, the CSBA raised the issue of improving federal support for immigrant and refugee families. We recently launched a national consultation process. Our draft paper, Meeting the Language, Learning and Settlement Needs of Immigrant and Refugee Children in Canada's School System, developed through extensive discussion with school boards, has also been sent to the federal minister. Our provincial associations are consulting with provincial governments, and we shall have a final paper shortly. But we have some early conclusions and recommendations. Number one, there needs to be an interprovincial collaboration and federal, provincial, municipal, and school board partnerships. The early stages of the Canada-Ontario Agreement are promising and showing a high degree of collaboration. Two, there are programs that work. The Federal Settlement Workers in Schools program is extremely successful. Its expansion could even greater impact on how well and how quickly families integrate. Intergovernmental and partnerships with school boards can ensure no one slips through the cracks that will give the right services delivered to the right people at the right time. Last year, we also expressed our concerns about the achievement gap in First Nations education. The CSBA National Office has begun working with the Assembly of First Nations, and our provincial associations are working with First Nations Authority in their regions. The CSBA focus is on students in our jurisdiction, public schools. There are examples of successes. The agreement in British Columbia and the partnership between the Saskatchewan School Boards Association and the Office of Treaty Commissioners are just a couple of examples. But what these examples also show that the cookie-cutter approach won't work. No two provinces are alike, and First Nations are not homogeneous. Let the grassroots lead. We'd also like to ask the federal government to fully support First Nations communities in developing their own capacity to deliver high-quality education. Research solidly provides investing in children in the early years represents a powerful investment. A child's readiness to learn at the grade 1 is the single strongest predictor on how a child will do in every grade. Indeed, throughout life, our paper cites a few of these studies. Every province, depending on their internal structure, geography, and demographics, has different ways of supporting early learning enhancement. We ask the federal government to support individual provinces and how they approach the development of our young citizens. And can I have about 10 more seconds? Okay. Finally, CSBA supports modernizing the Copyright Act. However, we need clarity on the issue of digital rights and on students and teachers' use of Internet materials in the classroom for educational purposes. The CSBA endorses the amendments put forward by the Council of Ministers of Education. The Council proposes a win-win situation, a solution that offers copyright owners the ability to receive payment via the Internet if they do not wish the materials to be freely available. And that's my report. Thank you very much.
Next from the Hotel Association of Canada, Mr. Pollard, the President. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate being invited back here once again to meet with this group. My association represents all of the lodging industry right across Canada. We did about $13 billion in revenue last year. We have about $11.5 billion is generated as value added for other sectors. We employ about 270,000 people, and needless to say, they're in each and every riding right across the country. One of the things I always like to point out when I appear before committees is that we're an industry that government typically likes. Last year, across Canada, we generated $5.1 billion in taxes, of which about 2.3 went to the federal government. So we kind of like those numbers. New people kind of like them. We still aren't at the levels where we were in the year 2000 when we hit our peak. The one area that I'd really like to emphasize strongly this morning or this afternoon now is, in business, successful operators have two maxims. One of them is that we never have enough business, and the second one is you should never leave any money on the table. Well, we believe very firmly that the federal government is leaving a whole bunch of money on the table when it comes to marketing and promoting Canada around the world. We've heard, and it's in our written brief, that if the federal government invested an additional $100 million annually, they would have an ROI of up to $620 million coming back to them. I wish I knew where I could take money like that and get that type of ROI, and it really dismays me when I see the government of Canada isn't making that investment. The second item I want to talk about very briefly is the fact that we have a shortage of people working in our industry, and I'm sure that a lot of other sectors are making the same case to you. This is particularly significant out west in Alberta and BC, but we're feeling it in a lot of other sectors, including the Muskokas and Tremblant and places like this. And there's a program in place called the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, run out of Human Resources Development. This needs to be expedited. We need to get people in here now. It is just not happening. That's critical to us. A couple other points very briefly. One of them is we're delighted the Government of Canada continues to support the infrastructure program, but we do see them needing to take more of a leadership role in upgrading the national highway system. In fact, we would see the elimination of the $22 billion maintenance deficit as being key. The air system in Canada needs to be overhauled. We need to remove the security charge. We need to adopt open skies. We need to increase foreign ownership, and we need to cancel the planned rent increases in Canada. The final one I want to just touch very, very briefly on is something that impacts all of you as parliamentarians, and that is the government rate and the process by which government rate is established across Canada. The Department of Public Works has come in with a new policy and a process. It doesn't work. It doesn't take into account the business cycle of hotels. It does not take into account the business cycle of people traveling on government business. The two aren't working together. They've imposed new rules on us. All that's going to happen is we're going to end up with a lack of good rooms for you, and the rate is going to go up. We're trying to work with them, and we're falling upon deaf ears. Mr. Chairman, I tried to be brief. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pollard, for your brevity and concise presentation. We'll conclude with the presentation from Palktutit, Inuit Women of Canada, and Madam Dixon. 5 minutes, please.
Okay. Ulakut. Good morning. I bring greetings from our President, Martha Gregg, and our Board of Directors, Inuit women from across Canada's high north, as well as youth and urban Inuit women who could not be here on such short notice. We were called last night at 6 o'clock. And who've tasked me, their Executive Director, with carrying their important message on their behalf. The primary purpose of this presentation is to respectfully request that Palktutit Inuit Women of Canada be recognized in the Government of Canada's 2007 budget. Palktutit is a vital national organization with a unique mandate that provides the Inuit Women of Canada with a united voice to improve the social, economic, and political conditions for Inuit women, their children, and their communities. In addition, Palktutit provides leadership to encourage Inuit women to take their rightful place in Canada's society. And I think it's not one bit of an exaggeration to say that with the exception of their children, they're arguably the most marginalized people in Canada. With this submission, Paututtit makes 4 recommendations that advance the interests of Inuit women and benefit all Inuit women in Canada. It is sincerely hoped and requested that these recommendations are afforded due and serious consideration. Inuit women are the keepers of the light, which means they're the custodians of the kulik, which is the traditional Inuit oil lamp that we've all seen in the movies. Formerly, it was the only source of light, warmth, and cooking for Inuit. Without the kulik, Inuit would never have survived the harsh conditions of Canada's Arctic. The kulik symbolizes survival as well as physical and emotional well-being. Inuit women are the keepers of the light and now play a similar crucial, integral role in governing their communities and their society. You might ask why Canada's Inuit women, what that has to do with your important theme for the current budget deliberations, Canada's place in a competitive world. In less than 4 minutes, let me try to answer that question. Inuit have by far the highest rates of poverty, highest rates of unemployment, lowest levels of formal education, highest cost of living, lowest levels of housing quality and availability, and highest by far suicide rates among all Canadians. Since Inuit women truly are the keepers of the light, many of these appalling circumstances are disproportionately borne by them. Paututit's mandate is to foster greater awareness of the needs of Inuit women and to support them by providing leadership, voice, and program excellence for the benefit of themselves, their families, and communities in the areas of equity, health, social well-being, cultural traditions, and economic development. In point of fact, Paututtit is the primary and almost always only national organization that develops and implements programs to put into action the Government of Canada's policy agenda in Canada's North. Let me just state that again. Paututtit is the primary and almost always only national organization that develops and implements programs to put into action the Government of Canada's policy agenda in Canada's North. Yet despite the breadth of Paututit's work, the organization is usually severely marginalized in influence and limited in resources as compared to resources made available to the other 5 national Aboriginal organizations. Though Paututtit is broadly recognized as one of 6 Canadian national Aboriginal organizations, this status has yet to be acknowledged formally by the Government of Canada. This failure translates into critical discrimination against Inuit women in terms of Paututit's mandate to independently represent them at policy tables and also results in our inequitable access to funding to engage in our important work in northern communities, support that is provided to the other NAOs. Why does it matter in the broad competitive world we find ourselves? Well, Canada is seen around the globe as a leader in human rights, equity, and fairness. It reflects well on us internationally when our record at home is strong, fair, and consistent. It is in this context that Paututtit respectfully makes the following 4 recommendations. 1, in order to fulfill its commitment to gender equity, it is recommended that the Government of Canada provide Paututtit financial support and recognition commensurate with that provided to the other 5 NAOs. Paututtit seeks adequate multi-year funding to allow the organization to contribute to the critical issues facing Inuit women, their families, and communities with the same stature, resources, and influence afforded the others. Recommendation 2, that the Government of Canada funding considerations reflect the disparity between the social conditions faced by Inuit family and those of other Canadians. Further, that these considerations factor in the unique high costs of transportation, health, social services, housing, food, and fuel in the Arctic. 3, that the Government of Canada put tools and instruments in place that encourage, support, and develop inter- and multi-departmental program partnerships and funding frameworks for programming dollars. There is now growing recognition that not only cost effectiveness but broader overall success on the ground may be achieved through multidimensional, holistic strategies that cut across the mandates of many traditional departments and agencies. Such an initiative must recognize the unique challenges and costs associated with Arctic programming and include tools to ensure gender equality. And 4, it is recommended that the Government of Canada commit to appropriately support the contribution that Paututtit makes to international issues and agencies. A practical long-term commitment of human and financial resources will ensure effective and meaningful participation at international events and practical contribution to the critical issues that Indigenous women are facing around the world. These are our 4 recommendations. As mentioned above, Paututtit is the national organization that represents all Inuit women. We have strong democratic roots across all Inuit communities and within southern urban areas. Through Pawtutit, Inuit women have a clear and unimpeded voice at the national level. The mandate is to foster awareness of the needs of the Inuit women and to encourage their participation, and in all matters as well as national and international concerns in the areas of health, social, cultural, environmental, and economic public affairs. Working in partnership with Canada's public and private sectors, Pawtutit delivers realistic and concrete projects and initiatives that bring measurable change within the remote Inuit communities.
We'll continue now with questions. We'll begin with Mr. McCallum. 6 minutes, sir.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. And again, I think the presentations, I'd like to congratulate you all for being compelling and succinct. Given my lack of time, I'd like to focus on one issue, which is tourism. So my question would be for Mr. Williams and Mr. Pollard. And when you don't have much money, sometimes it's good to focus on things that don't cost money. And I'd like to mention two. One is the issue of the Canada-U.S. passport requirement or possible passport requirement at the border. And the second is the issue of China. We on our side of the House thought the government capitulated a little too quickly on the passport issue. I wouldn't necessarily ask you to comment on that, but what is the current state of play? What are the implications for your industry? Do you think there's a solution, a viable solution that will not be too damaging in this area, and what is the time frame? Now, on China, I remember Mr. Emerson announcing in the House in 2005, when he was a Liberal, that we were about to sign an agreement with China known as the Approved Destination Status Agreement, which would facilitate Chinese tourists coming to Canada. Now, I don't know the numbers, but for a country of 1.3 billion, I think the potential might have been very high in terms of numbers of tourists. And now, the current government misses no opportunity to poke China in the eye, whether it's not meeting the ambassador or 0 ministerial visits to China versus 13 under the Martin government, and I could go on. But the Chinese have now refused to speak to the government of Canada on this subject, and so there's no prospect for this agreement. And I would think that that would be of major concern to the tourist industry. So my second question is, how important is this agreement with China, and what are the implications for your industry if no progress for the indefinite future is made on signing that agreement?
If I can take a first run at it.
Why don't you do passports and I'll do China?
Well, I got something to say on both, but I'll save you time there, Tony. The WHTI is a big hit on our industry, as you have heard. We're anticipating to lose in North America travel between Canada and the United States $2.5 billion before the law even takes effect. It's already had an effect on bookings and conventions and meetings across Canada, because nobody's going to book a convention in Las Vegas when they don't know what the law of the land will be. It's not only passports, it's other secure documents. They've still not been defined, and so there's a lot of confusion out there right now. 33% of Americans believe they need a passport to enter Canada. Well, that's wrong on a number of fronts. It's not to enter Canada, it's to go home, and that hasn't started yet. So you understand there's a whole bunch of issues there. There is a solution, and the solution is we've got to communicate to Americans that Canada has something to offer and we need to promote, because other countries are stepping up their marketing effort in the United States, and we're falling behind, as I had in my remarks. It is going to hurt us badly. It's going to hurt us in the long term, so we need to offset that with increased promotion. It will take effect. The update for you, Mr. McCallum, is that the passports will become law and other secure documents. They're on a track, and they will put this into effect. So we can't tell the Americans not to do this, unfortunately. It's going to become law. It's going to become a new reality at our border. So when you were speaking, and was anticipating questions, I had written down two things. WHTI, which is the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative and passports, and China ADS status. Those are two issues that are global in nature and foreign countries impacting our trade with those countries. When we had a beef dispute, the federal government stepped up and tried for many years to resolve the BSE problem with beef. We had a softwood lumber dispute. We stepped up and we negotiated softwood lumber. Tourism is bigger than those two industries combined, and we've done nothing on China ADS. In 1997, Australia, the first country in the world, got China ADS. Now, if we got China ADS today, we'd be 80th in the world to get China ADS status. It represents 100,000 Chinese to us now. It grew by 17% last year to 117, but it could mean 500,000, which is 500,000 if we had China ADS. So those two issues, we need increased investment and more attention on the China ADS, like softwood lumber got and BSE got. Sorry.
Mr. Pollard, there's not much time. It's all yours.
Be very brief. You have to be cautious with China ADS. There's only so many A340s and 767s in the world to be able to fly people across from China over to Canada. So it won't be a panacea that a lot of people think it would be. The other thing is we have prepared a document, a book on Canadian hospitality for Chinese guests, which can be used obviously in hotels, but in a lot of different sectors. I encourage people to go to our website to look at it.
To continue, thank you, Mr. McCallum. To continue, Monsieur Paquette, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
Mr. Paquette, you have 6 minutes. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your excellent presentations. Many of the points that you've raised are clearly important. We need to abolish the security tax. There are a number of other issues mentioned. I have a question for the representative of the School Board the Association of School Boards. It makes no sense to require an association like yours to pay the GST. There are transfers to the government, etc. So I think that you're absolutely right in that regard. As should be done for the municipalities, there should be an end put to the GST collected from you. With respect to the children of immigrants and refugees, you've raised this issue as a priority and stated that the federal government needs to recognize the role of communities and school boards in integrating the children of immigrants and refugees and their families. Now, I agree with that in principle, but I'd like to know what that means in concrete terms. Now, as you know, when we talk about immigration, there are areas of jurisdiction, provincial, federal. Now, having said that, of course, the federal government does have specific responsibilities for refugees. Could you be more concrete or more specific in terms of the recognition you would like to see for school boards with respect to the integration of the children of immigrants and refugees?
Is that there is an increased number of students coming into the system, and there are pressures. It has caused a whole new dynamic of pressures of delivering programs in our schools. It is, again, it's one of those areas where education is a provincial jurisdiction and immigration is a federal jurisdiction. But one of the priorities of bringing people into our country is that we get them up and running and functional within our society and within our communities. Right now, there are huge pressures coming in certain areas where, with language and some of the social areas that are in the education system. It's just an area that is growing and is causing concern. It also has an effect on the kids in the classroom also, that they're there. If the supports aren't there for the new kids, it has an adverse effect on the kids that are already in the classroom. So what we want to do is make sure that the supports are there for immigrant children coming into the schools, that it's not only advantageous for them, but it's also advantageous to maintain a high quality of education throughout the education system.
Est-ce que ça voudrait dire des transferts aux provinces spécifiquement?
So does that mean you're referring to transfers to the provinces to deal with the integration of these children then? Well, I'm very interested in the matter because my daughter is right in this field.
I think what we're after for is more supports in the areas of just in the areas of immigrant children and the supports for it. We realize that the provincial governments are responsible for the direct educational costs, but the immigration is an added cost to the education, so we are asking for support there.
Pour Madame Dixon, dans votre...
Now, a question for Ms. Dixon. In your recommendation number 3, you raised a concern that's very important to me as well. You talk about the interdepartmental partnerships and funding arrangements for programs, etc. I'd like you to be a little bit more specific when you talk about interdepartmental program partnerships and funding frameworks. And what is the role of the provinces in your recommendation? And I'm referring specifically to recommendation 3 in your brief.
What we're finding, and this isn't about Pauktutit, this is about many NGOs, is that there are pockets of activities and policy development across in many departments that would function much better if they worked together. And I can give you one example in our work, and that is that we do a lot of work on many facets of abuse, many kinds of abuse. And we spend probably 40% of our core activity developing, proposing, negotiating, reporting on tiny pieces of money from across various departments. Status of Women Canada has a little bit of money on to help on abuse. So INAC has a little bit more. Even CMHC, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Many, I think there are about 7 or 8 different departments who have little bits of mandate to work on abuse matters. And for an outside tiny NGO, we have to not only know all that, which takes a huge amount of work to even stay up on it, as you can imagine as a committee. You staying on top of it must be a major accomplishment, and we're not even privy to the communications that you have. And then to know about requests for proposals and timing and various requirements in terms of proposal drafting and the contents that are required, and then the negotiation, and then let's say you're fortunate enough to receive the $100,000 to work on one aspect of your national strategy on abuse prevention. Then you have to implement that work, report back to that department in their language, and I'm not talking about English and French here, I'm talking about very strict, sometimes arcane bureaucratic language, and that's all for one piece of one file for us. We've got 32 files across probably at the moment, I'm thinking about 11 different departments, that's aside from our private sector funders, and it is onerous, to say the very least, to pull that off. And even if we're successful, I don't think it serves the Canadian demographic that we're serving very well to do that much work at that level. If we can get the departments themselves to break across some of their silos and work together, and even maybe, hey, God forbid, pool those resources and make it easier for a smaller outside organization, especially an organization whose entire mandate is to implement the government policy on these matters. We should be partnering, we should be working together.
Very much, Mr. Paquette. Your time has elapsed. We'll continue with Mr. Dykstra. 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you. One of the, I guess I've got about 3 questions for 3 different of the groups. I'm just hoping we can scoot through this fairly quickly. One of the questions I had was for Mr. Bradley in respect to his recommendation regarding the Government of Canada should restore the 80% meal deductibility rate. I wonder if you've done a little bit of research on what that might potentially cost from a federal perspective, and whether that recommendation translates further through other industries, or is it just related specifically to yours?
Well, the Government of Canada over the last 10, 12 years has taken the position that this should be it would have to be a broad-based measure. The United States has taken a different approach. They've looked at different segments of the working population and decided where it makes sense to have a higher deductibility and where it doesn't. We have, and it's not mentioned in our brief, but we've always made the offer that we're quite prepared to work with government to set a limit. I mean, we're not talking about lunches at the Rideau Club and stuff like that for truck drivers. I mean, we're talking about a sandwich and a pop. So in terms of the costs, we can contain those, whether it was $25, $45 a day. You know, it's an odd situation where federal civil servants get about $75 a day tax-free allowance, and yet working Canadians don't, and particularly working Canadians that have to operate all over North America.
Thank you. One of the other questions I had was related to tourism, Mr. Williams. Just in terms of the WHTI, how long has this been an issue in this country, and how long have we known that this is a direction that the United States is going to take in that respect?
WHTI became law in December of 2004. It became known in April of 2005 when they started releasing the rollout of the law. And there's been final rulemaking that's come out that we've submitted to the first rulemaking, where there was an opportunity to submit input, and we've submitted now to the final rulemaking. It will take effect January 8th for air and sea of 2007 and January 1st of 2008 for land.
And from your perspective, there really isn't a. Should we continue to try to win the battle in terms of getting them to change their mind, or do you think that we're better off focusing on partnering with them and finding a way to make it work?
Yeah, I think we're better off trying to mitigate the damage. There will be damage. The border, as of next year, will become more expensive and more bureaucratic and more difficult for travelers. As people responsible for the public good, you must realize that our industry is going to be damaged for that, and so we should try and mitigate the damage.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I know I've got only a couple of minutes left, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Morrison, one of the recommendations that I read with great interest was the one that our Heritage Minister Bev Oda is moving forward on in terms of undertaking and establish an independent task force to review the mandate, role, and services of CBC, and that the task force would be charged with ensuring that removing political patronage from CBC's board and presidential selection process, in keeping with international standards for public broadcasting. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit, and any thoughts on how we could improve over the last 13 or 14 or 20 years.
Yes, sir. First, the recommendation of Minister Oda, there's an end of quotation mark before you get to the patronage part. The comment about patronage is one that we brought to the table. In the best practice of Western democracy, public broadcasting, it is not effectively the Prime Minister or the Cabinet or an order in council that appoints the senior leadership of the public broadcaster. In common with private sector corporations, a board of directors hires and fires the chief executive officer. And that process should be brought to bear in Canada. That is our opinion, but it was also the unanimous opinion, if I recall, of the Lincoln Committee in 2003. Then, of course, the question arises, how does the Board of Directors get there? And there have been recommendations that are present in public policy, again, the Lincoln Report, that nominations for the Board of Directors of something as important as the Canada Council or the CBC should come from a variety of sectors and represent a variety of perspectives and experiences the best and the brightest people should be running billion-dollar corporations.
So you'd
and that
argue
is
that
not a fiscal measure, but it is something that would increase public confidence and probably governmental confidence in the management of the Canadian Broadcasting.
So that type of accountability hasn't happened in the past, but it should certainly happen in the near future.
Yeah, we would be very supportive of an initiative of that type.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dykstra. We'll continue with Madame Wajlishli. S'il vous plaît, Madame.
Thank you.
6 minutes.
Just following up my colleagues' comments on CBC, are you not a little worried at all, Mr. Morrison, about Bev Oda's task force, that it may in fact really be an attempt to further dismantle CBC, put another knife in the back of our public broadcaster? Maybe I'm overreacting to some of the previous comments by the Conservatives, but I certainly worry about the future of a public broadcaster. So if you could answer that, plus indicate how you think, why you think a public broadcaster is important in terms of building a competitive nation.
Sure. The Friends of Canadian Broadcasting is supportive to the intent of Minister Oda's plan. That was a motion she moved in the last days of the last Parliament at the Heritage Committee, and it passed that committee with the support of the Bloc. The Conservative and Bloc voted for it. My information is that her proposal to do that has been blocked by the Prime Minister's office, which is a cause of concern to us. So we don't think at the moment that that proposal is going forward. I would love to be wrong about that. With respect to the second part of your question, the public broadcasting role in Canada with respect to competitiveness is partly to tell Canada's story to the world, and it's also to gather stories from a variety of locations in Canada. I referred to in my remarks the evidence of the Toronto Broadcasting Corporation, what it would look like if, in fact, the kind of broadcaster that happened during the lockout of last year were to become the case. You represent Manitobans in this Parliament, and Manitoba's share of CBC employment and resources has gone down a great deal in the recent past. So there's a question of equity. There's also a question of Canadians, particularly young Canadians, having access to stories, factual and fiction, about their own culture as opposed to stories from Los Angeles or Miami.
Thank you. For the school board, I don't disagree with your recommendation around a full rebate for the GST, but I think it's estimated to cost about $160 million a year. So you need to correct me on the numbers.
Our estimates,
Go ahead.
I think our estimates are it's in excess of $1 billion a year.
How much?
$1 billion.
$1 billion.
That was the numbers that. Yeah. I think.
Okay,
yeah.
so I'm way off.
Yeah.
Good at math. But okay, my question still holds. How do we make the argument to government then to take that, to find the, take that hit of $1 billion? What kind of benefits? What's the cost-benefit analysis so that we can see how we'll reap so much more if we in fact give school boards that much more flexibility?
Schools are a publicly funded entity, and right now what we're doing is and also the government is paying transfer payments to each of the provinces to make sure that these types of services happen. But then the money keeps going round and round. But one thing we really have noticed the last number of years is school budgets are becoming tighter and tighter, and expectations of schools is increasing. I think some of the things that we talked about here, which is early childhood identification, English as second language. These are all cost increases that come to boards of education. We need to make sure that the funding is available for the education is probably the only proactive endeavor that we do of almost any, especially dealing with children. Any money invested in education pays off. it takes an awful lot less money to educate a child than it does to run them through the penal system and we found that early identification of students, it saves tons of money just in the education. It's not a cost, it's an investment. Education is an investment, and we're taxing probably the most important resource that we have in our country, and we have to make sure that we're providing the best quality education for our students, and this is becoming an impediment to the success of our students.
If I have time for another question to Mr. Bean, you've touched on a very important issue as well, enhancing early childhood learning, but you've really skirted the debate that we're having daily in Parliament around investing in programs and spaces versus tax benefits or allowances or credits to individuals. Have you got a position as a school board in terms of the best way to ensure adequate childhood learning capacity in this country?
I think from our association, each of the provinces has a different approach to it. But again, we all agree that the research shows that investment in children at an early age helps in their success not only through school but beyond. Especially with special needs students and students at risk. It's not a cost, it's an investment.
Please, we'll continue with the second round of questions. Mr. McKay, and we will endeavor to make it 4 minutes.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I'll direct my questions, therefore, to Canadian Trucking Alliance. Appendix B, where you say that the successful NRCan program was suspended in March 06 after the purchase of 13,000 plus units of APUs. Apparently the government invested $6 million and the trucking industry invested $31 million. And I just want to, basically it's a cancellation of a program that seemed to be working. Have you got any insight as to why this is, or is this just sort of an anti-environment agenda on the part of the government?
No, I don't have any inside information on why it was canceled. All I would say is that this program was working. We're aware of the fact that the new government is developing a new Clean Air Act, or that's the name that it's been tagged with, and we think that this proposal is, or this program is one that deserves reinstatement. The part of the issue, one might say, well, why doesn't the industry invest in these things anyway? And in most cases we would agree with that. But what we found that with the auxiliary power units, there's a heck of a cost associated in terms of maintaining them, and when you get that sort of message out to the industry, people are loath to make an investment. So it does require, we believe, an incentive at this point in order to give people some comfort that they're not going to be absorbing a huge cost as a result of doing this.
Well, given their lack of enthusiasm for the environment, what about your Appendix C, which talks about trying to get a tax credit for investing in high-performance engines and new tires and aerodynamic improvements, which apparently would cost something in the order of about $25,000 a truck. Do you really think you got a snowball's chance on that one?
I remain eternally optimistic. If indeed the
how long does eternity last?
Well, an eternity perhaps, but indeed, if the environment is a key and an important issue to this country, both in terms of GHG and in terms of air quality, then I think that what we're proposing makes a heck of a lot of sense. The kinds of incentives we're talking about here are not enormous. It's going to require provincial cooperation on many of them. But ours is an industry that, while it's easy to point to transportation as a boogeyman in terms of the environment, we don't get a lot of credit for what we do, as a sector, and B, we've been excluded historically from the kinds of incentives that have been made available to other sectors, whether it's manufacturing, agriculture, et cetera.
Just on the final, one of the reasons your trucks are doing a lot of idling has to do with border problems. And I'm given to understand that there's a tax recently imposed by the U.S. government with respect to border crossings. Can you elaborate on that, please?
What you're referring to is just the latest in a long and ever-expanding list of so-called security measures. The most recent one is a proposed, it's not even a proposed rule, an interim rule that was published a couple of weeks ago by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, whereby starting on November 24th, they will begin to conduct inspections looking for possible sources of pests and disease in product that some shippers, it would appear, are importing from elsewhere in the world and putting a Produce of Canada label on it. We believe that if there are issues surrounding that they can be dealt with within the departments of agriculture, and we don't see why the trucking industry, including truckers who are hauling auto parts and everything else, need to pay this new Department of Agriculture fee. But as I say, this is a long list of irritants at the border. The U.S. security folks long ago moved away from risk assessment to check everything, everyone, all of the time. And because trucks are an easy target, we're at the front line, we end up paying it often.
What role, if any, has the government played in trying to assist the trucking industry and indeed the shipping industry generally with respect to this latest imposition of so-called terrorism issue?
Bioterrorism is the term they're using. The Agriculture Minister Stahl met last week with his counterpart, and the indications that we've gotten is that preliminary meeting was positive, that they are at least prepared to look at alternatives. So again, as I said to you earlier, I remain eternally hopeful. But just it seems when it's safe to go back in the water, they come up with other measures. So the border, we're not seeing the kind of slowdowns necessarily that we've seen in years gone by, but I can tell you the reason for that is that traffic is down across the border, both in terms of the car traffic and tourists, but also because our manufacturing sector has been hit extraordinarily hard by the dollar appreciation, that traffic levels are masking some of the problems at the border at the present level.
Thank you.
Present time.
Pour continuer, Monsieur Saint-Cyr, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur. 4 minutes.
We'll now move on to Mr. Saint-Cyr. You have 4 minutes. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to have a bit of a dialogue with Mr. Bradley now. I'm happy to see that we have a brief from a Trucking Alliance that addresses issues such as the environment. You are right in saying that often your reputation as an industry is not excellent, and so it's very interesting to see that the industry is asking the government to place greater emphasis on the environment, when we often have the impression that it's the opposite kind of situation that occurs. Now, more specifically, I'd like to address the issue of the auxiliary power units. There was a program abolished with the arrival of a new government. It was quite successful, and I'm trying to see just how successful that program was compared to others. We heard a lot of talk about the Energuide, and its impact on reducing greenhouse gases, etc. But I'd never heard about the program that you mentioned. Do you have any information? Can you compare it to others? Do you know how good it was in comparison to other programs, ones that have been abolished or others that continue to be in existence?
There are no other similar programs in the transportation sector, and that's what I'm involved in. How that compares to allowing people to get rid of microwaves quicker and that sort of thing, I can't compare. However, I think that it's clear that transportation is a major contributor to greenhouse gases. And while all the modes bear some responsibility for that, and certainly I think the freight sector pales in comparison, for example, to the contribution of cars, we believe that all components of our industry, all the various sectors, need to do everything they can, not only to enhance their fuel efficiency and thereby reduce greenhouse gases, but something that's been lost in all of this is smog. I mean, I cringe, this isn't a shot at public broadcasting, but every time I watch the CBC and they talk about GHG and you see smog in Toronto, people just don't get it. They're two different things. And our industry has, more than perhaps any other, made terrific strides in terms of improving the air quality. In fact, it's not beyond, I mean, it's somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but not really, that the air coming out of the new trucks that are entering the marketplace this fall will be cleaner than the air you're breathing in most cities. What we have lacked, I think, is a comprehensive environmental policy that in fact recognizes the difference between air quality and greenhouse gas emissions, and we're hopeful now that we can bring the two together. In that regard, I would challenge that, you know, if you look at our Clean Air Act plan, and as I indicated, we're talking about, from a smog point of view, eliminating the equivalent of about 100,000 vehicles, current trucks from the roadways in Canada, and from a GHG perspective, about 46,000 trucks. I would challenge that against any other program that's out there at the present time in terms of its impact. And the other thing is that what we're talking about isn't rocket science. We're talking about technology that is there already. We're simply talking about getting it into the marketplace quicker so you can have an immediate impact.
Donc, ce que vous nous dites, c'est que autant pour ce qui est...
So what you're saying then is that as regards the objectives to reduce greenhouse gases and air pollution, basically it's not true to say that we can't meet our commitments, that we can't do anything. We can do it. We simply need to have the will and the determination to take action as a society.
Comment.
I think we can do better.
Thank you, sir. Before we conclude, I'll remind committee members that we will be reconvening at 3:30 immediately following the vote this afternoon. Apparently there's a vote, so I'll encourage members to arrive as promptly as possible following that vote so we can keep the maximum time available for our witnesses this afternoon. And to conclude, Madame Ablonzi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for your presentations. We don't have a chance to have discussions in depth with all of you. We know that your material will be very helpful, but I did want to concentrate on the tourism factor and the hotel industry as part of this, of course, because we want, as Canadians, to be internationally competitive, globally competitive, as well as just make sure that institutions within our own country are healthy, because there's huge competition for traveling dollars, and particularly as the population ages, have more people doing more traveling in all the developed world. And so my question really is for us to concentrate on what needs to happen for our industry to be internationally competitive. And it'd be helpful if you just discuss that a little bit, maybe both of you.
The first point you have to be conscious of is that we are lacking a sufficient number of workers. Out in Alberta, you know this very well. We've got hotels out there that are only half open because we don't have the people to work in them. We need to be able to convince the department, to be able to convince human resources that there is a problem. They continue to be exceedingly bureaucratic, but running around saying, well, prove to us that you can't find workers. We have. There are no workers, all right? So a solution to it is to bring in under the Foreign Temporary Worker Program to bring in workers from other countries. I have people from El Salvador, from the Philippines, from Barbados, and from Dominican Republic. They are trained, they speak, pardon me, English. They're ready, willing, and able to come up here right now. The hotels will pay to fly these people up here, and yet the government continues to be so bureaucratic and to hold up all of these blockages to allow us to do it. That is the #1 priority that we need to address right now, and would be particularly beneficial for you out in Alberta, particularly in the resorts in British Columbia, right across the board. That's what we need to do to be competitive.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Three things, and I agree with Tony. HR is our #1, one of our top 3 issues. It's a challenge right across the country. It used to be just a summertime problem. At our peak season, it's a problem throughout the year now. So we've got to do a better job of getting foreign workers to work in our country and allowing for immigration to bring in workers for our industry. Open skies. It's not a costly venture it doesn't impact the budget of the federal government. We need to be more open to liberalizing our airways and allowing for greater access from China and from other countries so that people can visit us. We are difficult to get to, and when they're here, Canada's airlines are expensive compared to the rest of the world because we don't have enough competition, and the government's in too many airlines' pockets. So we need to take them out of the airports and the ATSC. And the last thing, if we've got a competitive industry right now that's globally ready, market ready, but if you don't advertise and you don't tell the world, and Australia is now investing $150 million, a country 2/3 the size of us, and we're investing $85 million that 3 years ago, and now $75. You've cut our budget by $10 million in 3 years, when the rest of the world's anteed up, according to UNWTO, by 11% increase in promotion of marketing. We've cut ours by 12% in 3 years. We're going in the wrong direction. You can't compete without advertising. If the world doesn't know about it, about your product, they won't come, and that's the challenge.
Thank you to all our panelists for the quality of your presentations, your responses, and for your appearance here today. We very much appreciate it. We are adjourned.